You think you're so smart, Linda, but you'll never survive without me. Devon sneered as he signed the divorce papers, his expensive pen trembling slightly in his manicured fingers. You're nothing but a glorified assistant, playing dress-up in the investment world. He looked up with that familiar condescending smile that had crushed my confidence for years, completely unaware that the termination letter for Whitmore Capital, his company, his legacy, his entire identity, was sitting in my briefcase, just 3 feet away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a woman who was told she'd never amount to anything without her husband ended up owning everything he thought he'd built, and how the biggest mistake of his life became the greatest gift of mine. The marble floors of the Pinnacle Financial Tower reflected the morning sun as I walked through the lobby, my heels clicking in rhythm with the dozens of other investment professionals beginning another day in downtown Portland's financial district. At 34, I had spent the last 8 years building my reputation as a portfolio manager at Sterling Investment Group, and despite what my husband Devon constantly implied, I had earned every promotion, every client, and every dollar of my success. Devon Whitmore had founded Whitmore Capital 5 years ago, a boutique investment firm that specialized in tech startups and emerging markets. What started as a small operation with 3 employees had grown into a respected firm managing over $200 million in assets. At least, that's what Devon told everyone at industry cocktail parties, his chest puffed with pride as he described his vision and his company to anyone who would listen. The irony wasn't lost on me that we had met at one of those very parties 7 years ago. I was a junior analyst then, fresh out of Northwestern with an MBA in finance, eager to prove myself in a male-dominated industry. Devon had approached me at the bar, confident and charming in his perfectly tailored navy suit, talking about market volatility and cryptocurrency trends, with the kind of assured authority that both impressed and intimidated me. "You actually understand what you're talking about," he had said that night, as if surprised that a woman could grasp complex financial concepts. "Most people at these things just nod along and pretend they know the difference between a bear market and a bull market." I should have recognized the condescension then, hidden beneath what I mistook for a compliment. Instead, I was flattered that someone so established in the industry, he was already 30 and running his own growing firm, would take notice of my insights about emerging market opportunities in Southeast Asia. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners, weekend trips to his cabin in the Cascade Mountains, and long conversations about market strategies that made me feel like an intellectual equal. Devon could be incredibly charming when he wanted something, and what he wanted then was me, specifically. He wanted the brilliant financial mind that could help legitimize his fledgling company and the connections I was rapidly building in the investment community. We married 2 years later in a lavish ceremony at the Columbia River Gorge, with 300 guests from the financial world watching as I promised to love, honor and apparently subordinate myself to a man who saw my success as an extension of his own ambition. The first few years of marriage had been relatively smooth. I continued climbing the ladder at Sterling while Devon focused on building Whitmore Capital. We were the power couple of Portland's financial scene, both young, successful, and apparently devoted to each other. Industry magazines featured us in their Rising Stars sections, and we were regular fixtures at charity galas and professional conferences. But success, I learned, has a way of revealing character rather than building it. As Whitmore Capital grew, so did Devon's ego. What had once been collaborative discussions about investment strategies gradually became monologues, where he explained market dynamics to me as if I were an eager student, rather than a seasoned professional managing a portfolio worth twice the size of his entire firm. At dinner parties, he would interrupt my conversations about municipal bonds or equity research to correct details that didn't need correcting, or to add necessary explanations that made it clear he didn't trust my expertise. "Linda's still learning the ropes in the big leagues," he would say with a patronizing smile to clients or colleagues, despite the fact that my track record at Sterling consistently outperformed market benchmarks, while his firm's returns were increasingly erratic. The professional condescension bled into our personal life like poison through a membrane. Devon began questioning my decisions about everything from household finances to social commitments, always with the underlying assumption that his judgment was superior to mine. When I suggested refinancing our mortgage to take advantage of dropping interest rates, he dismissed it as amateur hour thinking and insisted we stick with our current term. When I recommended we diversify our personal investment portfolio beyond tech stocks, he laughed and asked if I'd been reading investment advice for beginners again. Most cutting of all were the subtle ways he undermined my achievement. When I closed a major deal with a renewable energy company that brought Sterling a $15 million account, Devon's response was to joke that I must have worn the right dress to that meeting. When I was featured in Portland Business Journal's Women in Finance Spotlight, he made sure to mention to everyone who congratulated me that the article was probably just part of their diversity quota. I began to notice how he introduced me at industry events. "This is my wife, Linda, never. This is Linda Whitmore, portfolio manager at Sterling." The achievements that had once been mine became ours in his retelling, while his successes remained distinctly his own. But I tolerated it, rationalized it, and even enabled it because Devon had a gift for making his criticism feel like concern. "I just want you to be taken seriously in this industry," he would say after particularly harsh commentary about my professional decision. "You're so talented, but you need to be more strategic about how you present yourself." The worst part was that I started to believe him. Despite my consistent performance metrics, despite my growing client base, despite the respect I had earned from colleagues and competitors alike, Devon's constant subtle undermining began to erode my confidence. I found myself second-guessing decisions that would have been automatic earlier in my career, seeking his approval for strategies I had been implementing successfully for years. This morning was different, though I couldn't yet articulate why. As I settled into my office on the 23rd floor of Sterling's downtown headquarters, reviewing the portfolios that had made me one of the firm's top performers, something felt like it was shifting. Maybe it was the call I'd received yesterday from Callie Gilbert at Whitmore Capital, congratulating me on the quantum dynamics deal that had just closed. Maybe it was the realization that Devon hadn't even acknowledged that achievement, despite it being the largest single investment success of my career. Or maybe it was simply that after 6 years of marriage and 8 years in this industry, I was finally tired of pretending that Devon's success made him my superior, when increasingly, all evidence suggested the opposite was true. What I couldn't know as I opened my first client file of the day was that Devon's own miscalculations were about to create an opportunity that would change everything. Not just for our marriage, but for the entire dynamic of power between us. And it would start with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. The Whitmore Capital annual investor dinner was supposed to be my night. After 18 months of careful negotiation, strategic positioning, and meticulous due diligence, I had successfully orchestrated the acquisition of Quantum Dynamics, a cutting-edge AI startup that was revolutionizing predictive analytics in financial markets. The deal had closed just 3 days earlier, bringing Sterling Investment Group a $40 million account and establishing me as one of the youngest portfolio managers in the Pacific Northwest to land such a significant tech acquisition. Callie Gilbert, Morrison's managing partner, had personally invited me to present the case study at their exclusive dinner, an honor typically reserved for senior executives and industry veterans with decades of experience. The invitation itself was validation that my work was being recognized at the highest levels of the investment community. I had chosen my outfit carefully for the evening, a midnight blue dress that was professional yet elegant, paired with the diamond earrings Devon had given me for our 5th anniversary. As I applied my lipstick in the bathroom mirror of the Heathman Hotel's grand ballroom, I felt a rare surge of uncompromised confidence. Tonight I wasn't Linda Whitmore, Devon's wife who happened to work in finance. I was Linda Whitmore, the portfolio manager who had just pulled off one of the year's most impressive tech acquisitions. The ballroom was filled with Portland's financial elite venture capitalists, private equity partners, investment bank executives, and successful entrepreneurs who had built companies from garage startups to public corporations. I recognized faces from magazine covers and conference panels, people whose decisions influenced millions of dollars in capital flow across the Northwest. Devon had arrived separately, coming directly from what he claimed was a late client meeting at Whitmore Capital. He found me near the bar, where I was discussing cryptocurrency market volatility with Stefan Archer, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A prominent angel investor who had backed 3 successful IPOs in the past 2 years. Linda's always been fascinated by digital currencies, Devon interrupted, sliding his arm around my waist in a gesture that appeared affectionate but felt possessive. Though I keep telling her that the real money in crypto requires understanding blockchain architecture at a much deeper level than most portfolio managers typically achieve. Stefan raised an eyebrow slightly, glancing between us. He had been in the middle of praising my analysis of Ethereum's smart contract evolution when Devon inserted himself into the conversation. Actually, Linda was just explaining some sophisticated perspectives on DeFi protocols that I hadn't considered. Sounds like she's done her homework. Oh, she's definitely a quick study, Devon replied with that patronizing smile I had learned to dread. I've been mentoring her on the technical aspects of blockchain technology. It's fascinating how much there is to learn once you get beyond the surface-level investment strategy. The implication was clear to everyone within earshot. Any insight I had offered was really Devon's expertise filtered through my limited understanding. Stefan's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the respect I had been building in our conversation suddenly tempered by the suggestion that I was merely repeating someone else's analysis. I felt heat rise in my cheeks but forced myself to maintain composure. Stefan, I should mention that the quantum dynamics acquisition I'm presenting tonight actually leverages some of the DeFi integration strategies we were discussing. Perhaps we could continue this conversation after my presentation. Absolutely, Stefan replied, though his enthusiasm had noticeably cooled. Looking forward to hearing about the deal. As Stefan moved away to greet other attendees, Devon's grip on my waist tightened slightly. You don't need to oversell yourself, Linda. People can sense when someone's trying too hard to sound more experienced than they actually are. The comment landed like a physical blow, but before I could respond, Callie Gilbert appeared beside us, her genuine smile a stark contrast to Devon's calculated charm. Linda, I'm so excited for your presentation tonight. The preliminary numbers on quantum dynamics are extraordinary. I've already had 3 other firms ask how Sterling managed to identify that opportunity before it hit the mainstream radar. Linda's always had good instincts, Devon interjected smoothly, though of course spotting potential is only half the battle. The real skill is in structuring deals that actually close. That's where experience makes all the difference. Callie's expression flickered with confusion. Well, from what I understand, Linda structured the entire acquisition herself. The convertible debt arrangement and the equity participation framework were particularly innovative. Oh, absolutely, Devon agreed, his tone suggesting generous credit to a junior colleague. Linda did excellent work executing the strategy. I was consulting behind the scenes on some of the more complex structural elements, but she really took ownership of the implementation. I stared at him, feeling something crack open inside my chest. Consulting behind the scenes. The quantum dynamics deal had been entirely my initiative, from initial identification through final closing. Devon had been so focused on his own firm's investments that he barely knew the details of my work at Sterling. But here he was, in front of one of the most influential capitalists in Portland, subtly rewriting history to position himself as the architect of my success. That's interesting, Callie said slowly, her tone carefully neutral. Because when Linda pitched the deal to our investment committee, she presented it as entirely her own analysis and strategy. Perhaps there was some miscommunication about the collaborative aspects. The silence that followed was deafening. Devon's smile faltered for just a moment, before reasserting itself with forced confidence. Well, you know how it is in this business. Ideas develop through so many conversations and consultations that it's sometimes hard to trace exactly where they originated. But Callie wasn't buying it, and neither was I anymore. In that moment, watching Devon attempt to claim credit for work he had nothing to do with, in front of a professional contact who knew better, something fundamental shifted in my perception of our marriage. If you'll excuse me, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I should review my presentation notes before dinner begins. I walked away from both of them, my heels clicking against the marble floor with each step carrying me further from the woman who would have tolerated that humiliation in silence. Behind me I could hear Devon attempting to recover the conversation with Callie, his voice carrying that forced joviality he used when he realized he had overplayed his hand. But the damage was done, not just to his reputation, but to whatever remained of my willingness to let him diminish my achievements. As I found a quiet corner near the windows overlooking downtown Portland, I realized that something had fundamentally changed. I was no longer willing to be Devon's supporting character in the story of his success. What I didn't know yet was that while I was discovering my limit for his professional undermining, Devon was about to provide me with evidence of betrayal that would make his condescension seem trivial by comparison. The presentation would go perfectly. The real revelation would come later that evening, when I returned home early and discovered exactly how Devon had been spending those late client meetings he mentioned so frequently. My presentation at the Morrison dinner had been flawless. Standing before Portland's financial elite, I had walked them through the quantum dynamics acquisition with the confidence and expertise that Devon's earlier undermining had temporarily shaken, but couldn't ultimately destroy. The questions afterward were sharp and insightful, the kind that recognized me as a peer rather than questioning my credentials. Callie Gilbert had pulled me aside as the evening wound down to discuss potential collaboration opportunities between Morrison and Sterling, the kind of high-level partnership discussions that could define the next phase of my career. I should have felt triumphant as I drove home through the quiet streets of Northwest Portland. Instead, Devon's behavior at the dinner sat in my stomach like spoiled wine, leaving a bitter taste that even professional validation couldn't wash away. His attempt to claim credit for my work hadn't just been embarrassing, it had been revealing. The man I had married, the man I had believed was my partner in building a life together, saw my achievements as raw materials for constructing his own reputation. Our house in the Pearl District was dark when I pulled into the driveway at 10:30. Much earlier than I had originally planned. The dinner had concluded with coffee and networking, but after Devon's performance, I had lost my appetite for industry small talk. All I wanted was to get home, process what had happened, and figure out how to address the growing chasm between us. I used my key quietly, not wanting to wake Devon if he had already gone to bed. The house felt empty as I stepped into the foyer, my heels echoing off the hardwood floors we had refinished together during our second year of marriage. Those had been happier times, when we still felt like collaborators rather than competitors. The living room was empty as was the kitchen. Devon's car had been in the garage, so I knew he was home. Perhaps he was already asleep, or working in his home office as he often did when closing deals for Whitmore Capital. I climbed the stairs toward our bedroom, already mentally rehearsing the conversation we needed to have about boundaries and mutual respect. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard something that stopped me cold, the low murmur of Devon's voice, followed by a distinctly feminine laugh that definitely didn't belong to a client call. The sounds were coming from his home office, the door slightly ajar with warm light spilling into the hallway. My initial thought was that perhaps he was on a video call with a West Coast client. It wouldn't be unusual for him to be working with California-based investors late into the evening, but something about the tone of the conversation felt wrong, too intimate and playful for professional discussion. I moved closer to the door, my heart beginning to race as the reality of what I might discover started to crystallize. Through the crack in the door I could see Devon sitting at his desk, but he wasn't looking at his computer screen, he was looking down at his phone, clearly engaged in a video call that had nothing to do with business. "I miss you too," I heard him say, his voice carrying the kind of tender affection that he hadn't directed toward me in months. "This whole dinner thing tonight was such a waste of time. I should have just canceled and come over to your place instead." My breath caught in my throat. The dinner he was dismissing as a waste of time was the same event where he had publicly undermined my professional achievements. While I had been presenting the biggest deal of my career to industry leaders, he had been mentally elsewhere, wishing he was with someone else. "Did Linda suspect anything when you left early?" The voice coming through his phone was clear enough for me to recognize, and the recognition hit me like a physical blow. Deanna Gilbert, not just any Deanna Gilbert, but the Deanna Gilbert who worked as a senior analyst at Morrison Venture Capital, Callie's cousin and one of the rising stars in Portland's venture capital scene. I had met her several times at industry events, had even recommended her for a speaking slot at last year's Northwest Investment Summit. She was brilliant, ambitious, and apparently sleeping with my husband. Linda's too focused on her little presentations to notice much of anything else, Devon replied with a casual cruelty that made my stomach turn. She's been so excited about this quantum dynamics thing that she barely registers what's happening in the real world. It's actually perfect cover for us. The casual dismissal of my professional achievements stung, but it was the phrase perfect cover for us that revealed the true scope of his betrayal. This wasn't a recent indiscretion or a moment of weakness. This was an ongoing relationship that he had been carefully concealing while using my dedication to my career as camouflage for his infidelity. I still can't believe she doesn't know, Deanna said, her voice carrying a mix of amusement and concern. You two seem so together at industry events, Devon laughed. The sound hollow and calculating. Linda sees what she wants to see. She's so desperate to believe we have this perfect power couple thing going that she ignores all the obvious signs. Besides, she's so insecure about her place in the industry that she needs me to validate her success. As long as I keep playing the supportive husband role in public, she'll keep buying into the fantasy. The words landed like successive blows, each one more devastating than the last. Not only was Devon cheating on me, but he was doing it with someone from my own professional circle while simultaneously mocking my career achievements and questioning my intelligence. The man I had trusted with my heart, my home, and my professional confidences saw me as a convenient fool whose success existed only to serve his reputation while providing cover for his betrayal. When do you think you'll be ready to make things official with us? Deanna asked, her tone suggesting this was a conversation they had had before. Soon, Devon replied. I'm waiting for the right moment to transition things. Linda's so dependent on me professionally that I need to time it carefully. Maybe after she sees how the industry really views her work without my guidance, she'll be more willing to discuss ending things amicably. I backed away from the door on trembling legs, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid he might hear it. Every assumption I had made about our marriage, every belief I had held about Devon's character, every doubt I had entertained about my own worth and capabilities, all of it was crumbling in the space of a 5-minute conversation I was never supposed to hear. But beneath the devastation, something else was taking shape. Devon's plan to show me how the industry really views my work without his guidance revealed just how fundamentally he misunderstood both my capabilities and my position in the financial community. He genuinely believed that my success was dependent on his mentorship, that without his support I would be exposed as the inadequate professional he apparently thought I was. He was about to discover just how wrong he could be. I stood frozen in our hallway for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, my back pressed against the wall as Devon's voice continued to drift from his office. The conversation with Diana had shifted to logistics, when they could next meet, which upcoming industry events they would both attend, how to coordinate their schedules without raising suspicion. The casual efficiency with which they planned their deception was almost as devastating as the betrayal itself. My legs felt unsteady as I carefully made my way back downstairs, each step measured and deliberate to avoid any sound that might alert Devon to my presence. The house that had been our sanctuary now felt like a stage set where I had been unknowingly performing the role of the oblivious wife while the real drama played out behind carefully closed doors. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water with hands that trembled slightly, staring out the window at the city lights of Portland spread below us. This house, with its panoramic view of the Willamette River and the perfect sightlines to downtown, had been Devon's choice. Successful people need to live in places that reflect their status, he had said when we were house hunting 3 years ago. I had agreed, swept up in his vision of our ascending professional trajectory, not recognizing it as the first of many decisions where my preferences would be subordinated to his image management. Standing in our designer kitchen, surrounded by the carefully curated symbols of success that Devon had insisted we needed, I felt the full weight of how thoroughly I had been manipulated. Not just in the affair, though that betrayal cut deep enough, but in the systematic erosion of my confidence and autonomy that had been happening for years. The Devon I had fallen in love with had been charming and supportive, encouraging my ambitions and celebrating my achievement. But that version of him had existed only as long as my success complemented rather than threatened his self-image. As my career had flourished and my reputation in the industry had grown, his support had gradually transformed into subtle undermining disguised as concern for my professional development. Tonight at the Morrison dinner, when he had claimed credit for my quantum dynamics deal in front of Callie Gilbert, hadn't been an isolated incident of poor judgment. It had been the logical culmination of a pattern that had been building for years, Devon positioning himself as the architect of any success I achieved while simultaneously preparing to distance himself from me when my independence became inconvenient. I thought about Diana's question, when would he be ready to make things official with their relationship? The casual way she had asked suggested this wasn't a recent development, but a planned transition that had been under discussion for some time. How long had Devon been laying the groundwork for leaving me while continuing to benefit from my professional achievements and industry connections? The most insidious part was his conviction that I was too dependent on him professionally to recognize his deception or challenge his authority. In his mind, I was so insecure about my place in the industry that I would continue accepting his public diminishment of my work rather than risk losing his validation. He genuinely believed that without his guidance and support, I would be exposed as inadequate and fail to maintain my position at Sterling. But as I stood in our kitchen processing the magnitude of his miscalculation, something crystallized that felt like clarity cutting through fog. Devon's assessment of my professional standing was not just wrong, it was laughably outdated. The portfolio I managed at Sterling had consistently outperformed market benchmarks for 3 consecutive years. The quantum dynamics acquisition had been entirely my initiative, from identification through closing, and it represented the kind of forward-thinking investment strategy that was earning recognition throughout the Northwest financial community. The industry didn't see me as Devon's protégé, or as someone who needed his guidance to succeed. If anything, recent conversations with colleagues and competitors suggested that many people in our professional circle viewed Devon as the lesser talent in our marriage, someone who had achieved moderate success through timing and connections rather than exceptional skill. His affair with Diana wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a strategic miscalculation that revealed how completely he misunderstood the dynamics of our relationship and our respective positions in the industry. While he had been playing elaborate games to manage his image and plan his exit strategy, I had been building real expertise and genuine professional relationships that existed entirely independent of his influence. The question now was what to do with this knowledge. I could confront him immediately, demand explanations, and initiate the painful process of divorce proceedings that would likely drag on for months, while he attempted to claim half of assets that I had played an equal or greater role in accumulating. I could continue pretending ignorance while gathering evidence of his infidelity to strengthen my position in eventual legal proceedings. I could simply pack my belongings and leave, starting over somewhere else with the professional reputation and financial resources I had built independently. But as I stood in that designer kitchen, surrounded by the symbols of a life that had been built on increasingly false foundations, a different possibility began to take shape. Devon's plan to demonstrate my professional inadequacy, once I lost his guidance, represented an opportunity as much as a threat. If he was so confident that my success was dependent on his support, then perhaps it was time to test that theory in a more dramatic fashion than he had anticipated. The affair with Diana had given me moral justification for whatever actions I chose to take. But Devon's fundamental misunderstanding of my capabilities had given me something potentially more valuable, strategic advantage in a game where he didn't realize the rules had changed. I finished my water and quietly placed the glass in the dishwasher, moving through the familiar routine of our domestic life one last time, as the woman who had believed in the partnership we were supposed to represent. When I woke up tomorrow morning, I would begin the process of becoming someone else entirely, someone who would show Devon exactly how much he had misunderstood about my strength, my independence, and my capacity for strategic thinking. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was working with. Devon's overconfidence about my professional dependence suggested he wasn't paying close attention to my actual position at Sterling, or my broader industry relationship. If I was going to test his theory about my capabilities, I needed to know precisely what resources I had at my disposal. The conversation upstairs was finally winding down, Devon's voice taking on the tired affection of someone ending a lengthy call with a lover. Soon he would come downstairs, probably expecting to find me either asleep or reading in the living room, ready to play the role of the devoted wife who had no idea her husband was planning to abandon her once he felt confident she could survive the transition. He was about to discover that survival was no longer my primary concern. What interested me now was victory. I slept in the guest bedroom that night, claiming a headache when Devon finally came downstairs and found me curled up on the couch with a book I wasn't actually reading. He accepted the excuse with the casual indifference of someone whose mind was elsewhere, kissing my forehead with lips that had probably been promising Diana Gilbert forever just an hour earlier. The gesture felt like contamination, but I forced myself to respond normally, even managing a tired smile as he suggested I get some rest. "Big day tomorrow," he had said, apparently forgetting that he had no idea what my schedule actually looked like. "You did good tonight at the dinner, by the way. Callie seemed impressed with your presentation." The patronizing tone, "you did good," would have infuriated me 12 hours earlier. Now it simply provided more evidence of how completely Devon misunderstood the dynamics between us. In his mind, Callie Gilbert's interest in my work was a pleasant surprise rather than the logical result of months of strategic relationship building and demonstrated expertise. I waited until I heard his breathing settle into the deep rhythm of sleep before allowing myself to fully process what I had discovered. The affair was devastating on a personal level, but professionally it represented something more complex. Diana Gilbert wasn't just any woman, she was a rising star at Morrison Venture Capital, one of Portland's most influential investment firms. Her relationship with Devon created potential conflicts of interest that could damage both their careers if exposed improperly, but it also suggested opportunities I was only beginning to understand. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling Investment Group 2 hours early, using my keycard to access the building before most of the support staff had arrived. The 23rd floor was eerily quiet, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridors as I made my way to my office overlooking Pioneer Square. The early morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the awards and certificates on my walls, recognition that I had earned through my own merit. Despite Devon's constant implications to the contrary, I spent the first hour reviewing my portfolio performance in detail, documenting the specific returns and strategic decisions that had built my reputation at Sterling. The numbers told a story that contradicted everything Devon had been suggesting about my capabilities. Over the past 3 years, my managed assets had grown from $80 million to nearly $200 million, with returns consistently exceeding both market benchmarks and the performance of comparable portfolios within the firm. More importantly, I began to see patterns in my client relationships that Devon was completely unaware of. The renewable energy investments that had performed exceptionally well. The early identification of companies like Quantum Dynamics that represented emerging trends in artificial intelligence and machine learning. The careful diversification strategies that had protected my clients during market downturns while positioning them for recovery. As I pulled together this comprehensive review, a more complete picture began to emerge of my actual position within the industry. Devon saw my work as derivative of his guidance, but the evidence suggested something entirely different. I hadn't been following his strategic direction, I had been developing my own investment philosophy that was increasingly recognized as innovative and effective. The realization prompted me to dig deeper into information I had never bothered to research while I was focused on my day-to-day responsibilities. Using the financial databases Sterling subscribed to, I began investigating Whitmore Capital's actual performance over the past 2 years. Devon was always vague about specific numbers when discussing his firm's returns, and I had never pressed for details, assuming his success was obvious from the firm's growth and his confident presentation at industry events. What I discovered was shocking. Whitmore Capital's returns for the past 18 months were not just below market averages, they were catastrophically poor. Devon's firm had lost money in 11 of the previous 18 months, with particularly devastating losses in cryptocurrency investments and biotech startups that he had apparently bet too heavily on during market peak. The financial documents painted a picture of a firm that was struggling to maintain operations, despite managing what Devon claimed was over $200 million in assets. Client withdrawals had accelerated over the past 6 months, with several major investors pulling their money to invest with more stable firms. Two of Whitmore Capital's junior analysts had left for positions with competitors, taking institutional knowledge and client relationships with them. Most alarming of all was evidence of increasingly desperate investment strategies. Devon had been taking outsized positions in high-risk ventures, apparently trying to generate the dramatic returns necessary to compensate for earlier losses and retain fleeing clients. The portfolio showed clear signs of someone who was gambling rather than investing, making emotional decisions driven by the need to recover quickly rather than building sustainable long-term value. I cross-referenced these findings with news reports and industry gossip, piecing together a more complete picture of Devon's professional situation. Whitmore Capital wasn't the thriving firm he presented at cocktail parties. It was a struggling business that was probably months away from either major restructuring or complete failure. The irony was staggering. While Devon had been publicly undermining my achievements and privately planning to leave me because he believed I was professionally dependent on him, his own career was collapsing around him. The confident authority with which he dismissed my strategic insights was coming from someone whose own investment decisions had been consistently disastrous for nearly 2 years. But what truly shocked me was discovering how completely I had been excluded from awareness of his struggle. Devon had been presenting our financial situation as stable and growing, frequently mentioning new clients and successful deals that apparently existed only in his imagination or were vastly overstated. The expensive dinners, the luxury vacations, the designer renovations to our house, all of it had been funded through increasingly precarious financial arrangements that I knew nothing about. I found evidence of a second mortgage on our house that had been secured 6 months earlier, credit lines that had been opened in both our names but used entirely for business expenses at Whitmore Capital, investment accounts that showed recent liquidations of assets we had supposedly been saving for retirement. Devon hadn't just been cheating on me emotionally and sexually, he had been systematically concealing a financial crisis that threatened everything we had built together, while simultaneously planning to abandon me once he felt confident I could survive without his guidance. The discovery shifted my entire understanding of our situation. I wasn't the professionally dependent spouse in a marriage to a successful entrepreneur. I was the financially stable partner who had been unknowingly subsidizing the failures of someone whose business acumen was far inferior to his marketing ability. As Sterling's morning shift began to arrive and the building filled with the familiar sounds of a financial services firm beginning another day, I sat in my office reviewing documentation that revealed the true balance of power in my marriage. Devon's plan to demonstrate my professional inadequacy once I lost his support was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. He was the one whose career was failing while mine was thriving independently of any connection to him. The question now was how to use this information to my advantage. The full magnitude of Devon's deception became clear over the following week, as I methodically investigated every aspect of our intertwined financial and professional lives. What had started as a discovery of marital infidelity had evolved into the uncovering of systematic fraud that extended far beyond personal betrayal into criminal territory. Using the financial access I had as Devon's spouse and business partner, we had established joint accounts and shared investment portfolios during the early years of our marriage when we still believed in collaborative success. I was able to piece together a comprehensive picture of his increasingly desperate attempts to maintain the facade of prosperity, while his firm collapsed around him. The second mortgage on our house was just the beginning. Devon had also secured a home equity line of credit that he had been using to cover operational expenses at Whitmore Capital. Our retirement accounts, which I had assumed were growing steadily through regular contributions, had been systematically drained over the past 8 months to cover client withdrawals when the firm couldn't meet redemption requests from its own assets. But the most shocking discovery came when I accessed our joint investment account and found evidence of unauthorized trading that violated every principle of fiduciary responsibility. Devon had been using our personal funds to make high-risk investments on behalf of Whitmore Capital, essentially gambling with our money to try to generate the returns necessary to keep his firm solvent. When those trades inevitably failed, and the documentation showed a pattern of increasingly reckless speculation in volatile tech stocks and cryptocurrency futures, he had been selling assets from our supposedly stable portfolios to cover the losses. The conservative investment strategy we had agreed upon for our personal finances had been abandoned in favor of desperate attempts to solve his business problems through our family wealth. I spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing account statements, trading records, and legal documents that painted a picture of someone who had been systematically looting our shared financial resources while maintaining the pretense of professional success. The expensive dinners, the luxury vacations, the designer clothing that had maintained our image as a successful power couple, all of it had been financed through the liquidation of assets that were supposed to secure our future together. The most damning evidence came from email exchanges I discovered between Devon and his accountant at Whitmore Capital. The messages revealed that Devon had been knowingly misrepresenting the firm's performance to existing clients while soliciting new investments based on fabricated returns. Client statements had been manipulated to show profits that didn't exist, while actual losses were concealed through increasingly complex accounting maneuvers that bordered on Ponzi scheme methodology. "We need to show positive returns for Q3 or we'll lose the Morrison Pension Fund account," Devon had written to his accountant in September. "Use the paper gains from the cryptocurrency positions to offset the biotech losses, and don't mention the liquidity issues until after we close the Henderson deal." The Henderson deal, I learned through further investigation, was a fabricated investment opportunity that Devon had been shopping to potential clients. The company didn't exist except as a shell corporation he had established to create the appearance of legitimate deal flow. He had been preparing to take client money for this non-existent investment, presumably planning to use the funds to cover earlier losses while buying time to develop an exit strategy. But what made the situation truly explosive was the connection to Diana Gilbert and Morrison Venture Capital. Devon's affair wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a professional strategy designed to gain access to Morrison's deal flow and client network. Diana had been sharing confidential information about Morrison's investment strategies, client preferences, and planned exits that Devon was using to position Whitmore Capital as a competitor, while stealing proprietary intelligence. Email exchanges between Devon and Diana revealed the scope of this corporate espionage. She had provided him with advance notice of Morrison's planned investment in a renewable energy startup, allowing Devon to approach the company first with a competing offer. She had shared client lists that Devon used to poach investors who were dissatisfied with Morrison's conservative approach. Most damaging of all, she had given him access to Morrison's due diligence reports on potential investments, intellectual property that Devon was using to guide his own firm's decision-making without attribution. The relationship that I had discovered as marital infidelity was actually a sophisticated scheme to commit securities fraud, corporate espionage, and investment misappropriation on a scale that could result in criminal charges for both participants. Devon wasn't just cheating on me. He was using Diana to steal from her employer while systematically defrauding his own clients and looting our personal assets to maintain the charade. The scope of the deception was staggering, but what struck me most profoundly was how completely Devon had underestimated my ability to uncover and understand what he was doing. His confident assertions about my professional dependence on his guidance were coming from someone who had been committing financial crimes that I could identify and document with the analytical skills he constantly dismissed as inadequate. Every condescending comment about my limited understanding of complex financial structures, every patronizing explanation of investment strategies that I supposedly couldn't grasp without his mentorship, every public diminishment of my analytical capabilities, all of it was coming from someone whose own financial decision-making had been so catastrophically poor that he had resorted to fraud to maintain the appearance of competence. The final piece of the puzzle came when I discovered Devon's correspondence with a bankruptcy attorney. He had been quietly exploring options for dissolving Whitmore Capital while protecting his personal assets from client lawsuits and regulatory sanction. The strategy involved transferring ownership of various assets to my name without my knowledge, using our marriage as a shield to hide wealth from his creditors and the investors he had defrauded. I was supposed to be the unwitting accomplice in his financial crimes, the naive spouse whose name could be used to conceal assets while he disappeared from the wreckage of his failed firm and destroyed relationships. His plan to leave me for Diana wasn't just about personal preference, it was about timing his exit to coincide with the collapse of Whitmore Capital. ensuring that I would be left holding legal responsibility for debts and obligations I knew nothing about. But Devon had made a critical miscalculation. The woman he thought was too professionally dependent and personally insecure to challenge his authority was actually someone with the analytical skills to uncover his scheme and the industry connections to expose it effectively. His systematic underestimation of my capabilities had created the perfect conditions for his own destruction. As I compiled the evidence of his fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage, I realized that I held the power to destroy not just Devon's career, but potentially Diana's as well. More importantly, I had discovered that my own financial position was far stronger than I had understood, while his was catastrophically weaker than he had been pretending. The balance of power in our relationship wasn't just shifting. It had already shifted completely. Devon simply didn't know it yet. I took a personal day from Sterling on Friday, claiming a family emergency that wasn't entirely untrue. The emergency was that my entire understanding of my family had been systematically demolished over the course of a single week, and I needed time away from the familiar routines of my professional life to process the emotional earthquake that was reshaping everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my finances, and my future. Devon left for the office that morning with his usual confidence, kissing me goodbye with the casual affection of someone who believed his deceptions remained undetected. "Try to rest today," he said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror with the practiced ease of someone who had been performing the role of successful entrepreneur for so long that he had forgotten it was a performance. "You've been working too hard lately. Maybe we should plan a weekend getaway soon." The suggestion of a romantic retreat from the man who had been planning to leave me for his mistress while using our joint assets to cover his financial crimes was so absurd that I almost laughed. Instead, I smiled and promised to consider it, watching him drive away in the BMW that I now knew had been purchased with money stolen from our retirement accounts. Once I was alone in the house, the emotional weight of what I had discovered settled over me like a physical presence. I had been methodical and analytical during my investigation, approaching Devon's deception with the same systematic precision I used to evaluate investment opportunities. But with all the evidence compiled and the scope of his betrayal fully understood, I finally allowed myself to feel the human cost of his calculated manipulation. The anger came first, white-hot and overwhelming. Not just anger at the affair, though Diana's betrayal stung particularly because I had genuinely respected her professional achievement. Not just anger at the financial fraud, though the systematic theft of our shared assets represented a violation of trust that went beyond mere marital infidelity. What enraged me most was the casual cruelty with which Devon had dismissed my intelligence and professional capabilities while committing crimes that demonstrated his own profound inadequacy. Every patronizing comment about my limited understanding of complex financial structures had been projection from someone whose own investment decisions had been so disastrously poor that he had resorted to fraud and theft. Every condescending explanation of market dynamics had come from someone who had been manipulating client statements to hide catastrophic losses. Every public diminishment of my analytical skills had been delivered by someone who couldn't recognize that his own spouse was capable of uncovering his elaborate deception. The psychological manipulation was almost worse than the financial theft. Devon had spent years systematically undermining my confidence in my own judgment, making me question my professional instincts and seek his validation for decisions I was perfectly capable of making independently. He had positioned himself as the authority on my worth and capabilities while his own career collapsed around him through a combination of incompetence and criminal behavior. But beneath the anger, something else was taking shape, a cold, clarifying determination that surprised me with its intensity. The woman who had entered this marriage 7 years ago, eager to please and seeking external validation, might have been devastated by these revelations. She might have confronted Devon emotionally, demanded explanations, and allowed him to manipulate her into believing that somehow his betrayal was partially her fault. I was no longer that woman. The professional success I had achieved at Sterling, the industry relationships I had built, the investment strategies I had developed, all of it existed entirely independent of Devon's influence or support. His systematic attempts to undermine my confidence had failed to change the objective reality of my capabilities and achievements. If anything, succeeding despite his subtle sabotage had made me stronger and more self-reliant than I would have been with genuine support. I spent the afternoon walking through Portland's Lansu Chinese garden, seeking clarity among the carefully designed landscapes that had been created to inspire contemplation and reflection. The garden's philosophy emphasized harmony between opposing forces, but as I sat beside the artificial lake watching koi fish navigate their constructed environment, I realized that my situation required a different approach entirely. There would be no harmony with Devon, no reconciliation that could repair the fundamental violations of trust that defined our relationship. He had positioned our marriage as a zero-sum competition where my success diminished his authority, and he had chosen to respond through deception, theft, and betrayal. The time for seeking balance or mutual understanding had passed, but what kind of response was appropriate for someone who had committed crimes against both me personally and his clients professionally? Traditional divorce proceedings would be lengthy and expensive, allowing Devon time to hide additional assets or destroy evidence of his financial fraud. Reporting his crimes to regulatory authorities would eventually result in justice, but it might take years of legal proceedings to achieve resolution. What I needed was a strategy that addressed both the personal betrayal and the professional crimes simultaneously, something that would demonstrate the full extent of his miscalculation about my capabilities, while ensuring that he faced appropriate consequences for his actions. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden's pathways, a possibility began to take shape that was both elegant and devastating. Devon's greatest vulnerability wasn't legal or financial. It was his desperate need to maintain the appearance of success while his business collapsed around him. His entire identity was built on the fiction that he was a respected entrepreneur and financial expert, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. What if I could use his own strategy against him? What if I could manipulate the public narrative of our relationship and his professional standing with the same calculated precision he had used to deceive me and his clients? The idea that was forming required careful planning and perfect execution, but it would address every aspect of his betrayal, while demonstrating that the woman he had dismissed as professionally dependent possessed capabilities he had never imagined. More importantly, it would ensure that justice was served not through the slow machinery of legal proceedings, but through the immediate and irreversible consequences of market forces and professional accountability. By the time I left the garden as evening approached, I had made my decision. Devon had spent years positioning himself as the superior partner in our relationship, the successful entrepreneur, married to someone who needed his guidance to navigate complex professional challenges. It was time to show him exactly how wrong he had been about everything. Monday morning brought an unexpected opportunity when Callie Gilbert called my direct line at Sterling just after 9 a.m. Her voice carried the kind of focused energy that signaled a significant business proposition rather than casual professional networking. "Linda, I hope you don't mind the direct approach, but I've been thinking about our conversation at the Morrison dinner last week," she began. "The quantum dynamics deal has been generating quite a bit of discussion among our investment committee. We're seeing some opportunities for collaboration that could benefit both Sterling and Morrison." The timing was almost too perfect. While Devon believed I was professionally dependent on his guidance, one of Portland's most influential capitalists was calling to discuss partnership opportunities based entirely on my independent work. I kept my voice carefully neutral, not wanting to seem overeager despite my growing excitement about what this conversation might reveal. "I'd be very interested in exploring potential collaboration. The quantum dynamics acquisition opened some interesting possibilities for expansion into adjacent AI markets that might align with Morrison's investment thesis." "Exactly what I was hoping to hear," Callie said. "Would you be available for lunch this week? I'd like to discuss some specific opportunities, and frankly, I'd appreciate your perspective on some trends we're seeing in the emerging tech sector." We arranged to meet Wednesday at Higgins Restaurant, a downtown establishment, popular with Portland's business community but discreet enough for sensitive discussion. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Callie's call represented more than just a business opportunity. It was validation that my professional reputation existed entirely independent of any connection to Devon or his struggling firm. But I needed more information about the broader industry perception of my work and capabilities. Over the next 2 days, I made strategic calls to colleagues and contacts throughout Portland's financial community, ostensibly seeking their perspectives on market trends, but actually gauging their assessment of my professional stand. The conversations were illuminating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Stephen Archer, the angel investor I had been speaking with at the Morrison dinner before Devon's interruption, was particularly candid when I called to follow up on our discussion about cryptocurrency market. "I have to say, Linda, your analysis of DeFi protocols was refreshing," he said. "Most portfolio managers in this market are still thinking about crypto as speculative assets, rather than fundamental infrastructure. Your husband seemed to have some different perspectives." The comment gave me an opening to probe further. "Devon and I sometimes approach these markets from different analytical frameworks," I said carefully. "What's your general impression of Whitmore Capital's positioning in the tech sector?" There was a slight pause before Stephen responded, and I could hear the diplomatic calculation in his voice. "Well, Devon certainly projects confidence about his firm's capability. Though I have to admit, some of the deals he's mentioned in recent conversations don't align with what I'm seeing in the actual market. Perhaps he's working with different information sources." The polite skepticism in Stephen's tone suggested that Devon's reputation in the investment community was more precarious than I had realized. Other conversations with industry contacts revealed similar patterns. Devon was known as someone who talked confidently about major deals and impressive returns, but few people had direct knowledge of Whitmore Capital's actual performance or client base. More significantly, several contacts mentioned their respect for my work at Sterling without any reference to Devon's influence or guidance. Marcus Webb, a senior partner at a competing investment firm, was particularly direct when I called to discuss potential collaboration on renewable energy investments. "Your track record on clean tech has been exceptional," he said. "We've been watching the Quantum Dynamics acquisition with interest. That kind of forward-thinking positioning is exactly what this market needs. Sterling is lucky to have someone with your analytical capability." The comment revealed something important. The industry viewed my success as a Sterling achievement rather than something connected to my marriage or Devon's mentorship. While he had been publicly claiming credit for my insights and strategic decisions, the broader financial community recognized my work as independently valuable. But the most enlightening conversation came from an unexpected source. Evelyn Archer, Stephan's sister and a managing director at Pacific Northwest Trust, called me directly Tuesday afternoon with what she described as a sensitive inquiry. "Linda, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I wanted to discuss something confidentially," she began. "We've been approached by someone representing Whitmore Capital about potential partnership opportunities, and frankly, some of the financial projections we've been shown don't align with our independent market research." My pulse quickened as I realized she was describing Devon's desperate attempts to attract new capital for his failing firm. "What kind of discrepancies are you seeing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice professionally neutral. "The returns they're claiming for cryptocurrency and biotech investments seem inconsistent with broader market performance in those sectors," Evelyn explained. "We're also having difficulty verifying some of the client references they've provided. I was hoping you might be able to offer some insight, given your expertise in emerging markets analysis." The request put me in a delicate position. I couldn't directly expose Devon's financial fraud without risking legal complications for myself, but I could provide guidance that would protect Evelyn's firm from falling victim to his deception. "I'd recommend conducting very thorough due diligence on any investment opportunities from boutique firms right now," I said carefully. "The market pressures in tech and crypto have been particularly challenging for smaller operations that may have over-leveraged themselves during the growth period." "That's consistent with our concerns," Evelyn replied. "Thank you for the guidance, and Linda, if you're ever interested in exploring opportunities outside Sterling, we'd love to discuss how your skills might fit with our expansion plan." The conversation confirmed that Devon's attempts to raise capital were failing because sophisticated investors could recognize the inconsistencies in his financial projection. More importantly, it revealed that my reputation in the industry was strong enough to generate unsolicited job offers from respected firms. As I prepared for my lunch meeting with Callie Gilbert, I realized that my investigation into Devon's deception had uncovered something unexpected. My own professional position was far stronger than I had understood while I was focused on managing my portfolio and executing successful deals. The industry contacts who knew my work valued my analytical capabilities and strategic insights independently of any connection to Devon or his struggling firm. What had started as a search for allies in exposing Devon's betrayal had revealed that I already possessed the most important asset I needed: a professional reputation built on demonstrated competence and results. The question now was how to leverage that reputation to respond to Devon's deception in a way that would serve both justice and my own strategic interests. Wednesday's lunch with Callie would provide the first test of how far that reputation could take me. Wednesday's lunch with Callie Gilbert exceeded my most optimistic expectations. We met at Higgins Restaurant, a beautifully appointed establishment in the Pearl District where Portland's business elite conducted their most important negotiations over locally sourced cuisine and carefully selected wine. Callie had reserved a corner table that provided privacy for sensitive discussions, while maintaining the professional atmosphere appropriate for high-level financial conversation. Morrison is looking to expand our portfolio management services, and your work on quantum dynamics has caught the attention of our entire investment committee. We're prepared to offer you a position as senior portfolio director with equity participation and full autonomy over $100 million initial fund. The offer was staggering, not just the financial terms, which represented a significant advancement from my current position at Sterling, but the recognition it implied. Morrison Venture Capital was offering me leadership of a substantial investment fund based solely on my demonstrated track record and analytical capability. There was no mention of Devon, no reference to his supposed mentorship, no suggestion that my success required external guidance or validation. The compensation package would include a base salary of $400,000 annually, plus performance bonuses tied to fund returns and equity participation that could be worth several million if we hit our growth targets. Callie continued, but what I think would really interest you is the opportunity to shape investment strategy in emerging markets where your expertise could have significant impact. I managed to maintain professional composure while my mind raced through the implications of her offer. The financial independence it represented would eliminate any concern about my ability to survive Devon's betrayal. More importantly, it would provide me with institutional resources and industry credibility that could be crucial for the plans that were beginning to crystallize in my mind. Callie, I'm genuinely honored by the offer, I replied carefully. Morrison's reputation in the venture capital space is exceptional, and the opportunity to build something new would be exciting. Can I ask what timeline you're considering for this transition? We're hoping to have someone in place within the next 6 weeks, she said. The fund launch is scheduled for early next year, which would give you time to wrap up your commitments at Sterling and develop your strategic vision for the new portfolio. The timing was perfect for what I was beginning to plan. 6 weeks would provide sufficient time to gather the additional evidence I needed while positioning myself for maximum strategic advantage when I revealed Devon's deception. But I needed to understand one more crucial detail about Morrison's corporate structure and decision-making process. I assume this position would require approval from Morrison's full partnership, I said, given the scope of the investment authority involved. Callie smiled with the confidence of someone delivering good news. Actually, my cousin Diana sits on our investment committee, and she's been particularly supportive of bringing you on board. She mentioned that she's followed your work in the industry and believes you represent exactly the kind of innovative thinking Morrison needs. The irony was so profound that I almost choked on my wine. Diana Gilbert, Devon's mistress and co-conspirator in corporate espionage, was actively advocating for Morrison to hire me, apparently unaware that I knew about her affair or her role in stealing proprietary information from her own employer. Her support for my candidacy created an opportunity I could never have imagined. That's wonderful to hear, I managed to say. Diana's work at Morrison has been impressive. I'd look forward to collaborating with her. After lunch, I returned to Sterling with my mind racing through the strategic possibilities that Callie's offer had opened. Not only did I now have a concrete alternative to my current position that would provide financial security independent of Devon, but I had discovered that Diana was actively working to bring me into Morrison's organization, creating the perfect conditions for exposing her corporate espionage from within the very firm she was betraying. That evening, while Devon attended what he claimed was a client dinner but which I now suspected was another meeting with Diana, I used our home office to conduct a more systematic investigation of their collaborative deception. With access to Devon's computer and financial records, I was able to piece together a comprehensive timeline of information theft and securities fraud that painted an even more damaging picture than my initial discoveries. The email exchanges between Devon and Diana revealed the sophisticated nature of their scheme. Diana had been providing him with advance notice of Morrison's investment decisions, allowing Whitmore Capital to position competing offers or adjust its own portfolio to benefit from insider knowledge. She had shared confidential due diligence reports that Devon used to guide his firm's strategy without conducting his own research. Most damaging of all, she had given him access to Morrison's client list, which he had used to solicit investments by claiming superior returns that were actually based on stolen information. But what made their scheme particularly vulnerable was its documentary trail. Both Devon and Diana had been careless about operational security, conducting much of their communication through corporate email systems and leaving clear evidence of their coordination. Diana's position at Morrison gave her access to highly confidential information, but it also meant that her communications were subject to corporate monitoring and legal discovery if their activities were exposed. As I compiled this evidence, a comprehensive strategy began to take shape that would address every aspect of their betrayal while positioning me for maximum advantage. The plan required careful timing and perfect execution, but it would accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously: exposing their corporate espionage, revealing Devon's financial fraud, protecting Morrison from continued information theft, and demonstrating my own capabilities in the most dramatic way possible. The key insight was that Diana's advocacy for my hiring at Morrison created the perfect opportunity to expose their scheme from a position of strength rather than as an accusation from a betrayed spouse. If I accepted Morrison's offer, I would be in position to document their corporate espionage from within the organization they were betraying, while simultaneously building the institutional support necessary to ensure that my revelations were taken seriously by both regulatory authorities and industry leaders. But the plan required one additional element that would transform it from corporate whistleblowing into something more satisfying: a way to demonstrate that the woman Devon had dismissed as professionally dependent actually possessed capabilities he had never imagined. That element would require leveraging my new position at Morrison to accomplish something that would fundamentally alter the balance of power between us, not just personally but professionally and financially as well. As I reviewed the evidence of Devon's failing firm and documented crimes, the perfect strategy began to emerge. Devon had been so focused on maintaining the appearance of success while his business collapsed that he had missed the most important development in our relationship. I was no longer the financially dependent spouse seeking his approval. I was becoming someone with the resources and institutional support necessary to acquire control of the very firm he was desperately trying to save. The plan that crystallized that evening would show Devon exactly how much he had underestimated my capabilities, while ensuring that justice was served for both his personal betrayal and his professional crime. The following 2 weeks required a performance that would have impressed professional actors. Each morning I woke up beside Devon and played the role of the devoted wife who remained blissfully unaware of his affair, his financial crimes, and his systematic undermining of my professional reputation. I made coffee while he showered, kissed him goodbye at the door, and even planned what I claimed was a surprise weekend getaway to celebrate our upcoming 7th anniversary. The psychological strain of maintaining this facade was extraordinary. Every casual lie Devon told about his whereabouts, every condescending comment about my work, every stolen moment he spent texting Diana while sitting across from me at dinner, all of it required a response of believable normalcy while my mind was actually focused on gathering the evidence necessary to destroy both their careers and expose their systematic betrayal. But the performance served a crucial strategic purpose. Devon's confidence in his deception was making him increasingly careless about operational security. He left his phone unlocked while showering, conducted video calls with Diana from his home office without checking if I was in the house, and even brought Morrison Venture Capital documents to our kitchen table while reviewing stolen intelligence that he didn't realize I could identify and photograph. During my regular workdays at Sterling, I maintained my usual professional excellence while secretly preparing for my transition to Morrison. I had accepted Callie's offer with appropriate enthusiasm, giving Sterling the standard 2 weeks' notice while privately coordinating with Morrison's legal team to ensure that my new position would provide access to the information necessary to document Diana's corporate espionage. The most delicate aspect of this double life was managing my interactions with Diana herself. Morrison's onboarding process required several meetings with existing investment committee members, including strategy sessions where Diana and I discussed portfolio allocation theories and market analysis frameworks. These conversations were surreal exercises in professional collaboration with someone who was actively betraying both her employer and stealing my husband. "I'm really excited about working together," Diana said during one particularly bizarre lunch meeting at Morrison's offices. "Your analytical approach to emerging markets could revolutionize how we think about tech sector investments." Devon mentioned that you'd been developing some interesting theories about cryptocurrency integration in traditional portfolios. The reference to Devon required every ounce of self-control I possessed. Not only was Diana sleeping with my husband, but she was using intelligence from their pillow talk to guide Morrison's investment strategy while claiming credit for insights that originated from conversations stolen from our marriage. The layered betrayal was breathtaking in its complexity and audacity. "Devon and I often discuss market trends," I replied with practiced neutrality. "Though I find that institutional investment decisions require more rigorous analysis than what's appropriate for casual conversation." The subtle dig was lost on Diana, who nodded enthusiastically while remaining completely unaware that her new colleague had discovered her affair and was systematically documenting her corporate espionage. Her confidence in the security of her deception was making her as careless as Devon about leaving evidence of their collaboration. Meanwhile, my investigation into Devon's financial crimes was revealing additional layers of fraud that extended beyond what I had initially discovered. Using the forensic accounting skills I had developed through my investment analysis work, I traced a pattern of client money manipulation that suggested Whitmore Capital was operating as an elaborate Ponzi scheme designed to maintain the appearance of profitability while Devon desperately searched for an exit strategy. Client statements had been systematically falsified to show profits that didn't exist. New investor money was being used to pay withdrawal requests from existing clients who believed they were receiving returns on successful investment. Most damning of all, Devon had been creating fictional investment opportunities, shell companies, and non-existent deals that allowed him to claim management fees and performance bonuses while the supposed investments disappeared into his personal account. The documentation of these crimes required careful coordination with financial databases and regulatory filings that I could access through my new position at Morrison. As a senior portfolio director with institutional research privileges, I could verify the non-existence of companies that Devon claimed to be investing in and cross-reference client statements with actual market performance data that revealed the scope of his deception. But perhaps the most valuable intelligence came from Diana's own carelessness about information security. During our strategy meetings at Morrison, she frequently referenced competitive intelligence about other firms' investment activities that could only have come from unauthorized access to confidential information. When she mentioned specific details about Sterling's planned expansion in renewable energy markets, information that hadn't been publicly announced, I realized that her corporate espionage extended beyond sharing Morrison's secrets with Devon to stealing intelligence from multiple firms throughout Portland's financial community. "It's fascinating how some firms are positioning themselves for the energy transition," Diana said during one afternoon meeting, reviewing market projections on her computer screen. "Sterling's renewable portfolio has been particularly aggressive, though I wonder if they're over-leveraged in solar infrastructure given the supply chain constraints we're seeing." Her knowledge of Sterling's internal investment thesis was so detailed and current that it could only have come from industrial espionage, either through hacking computer systems or bribing employees to share confidential information. The realization that Diana was conducting systematic intelligence theft across multiple firms transformed my understanding of the criminal conspiracy I had uncovered from a personal betrayal into an organized scheme that threatened the integrity of Portland's entire financial community. As my official start date at Morrison approached, I had compiled evidence of securities fraud, corporate espionage, money laundering, and systematic client deception that represented one of the most comprehensive corporate crime schemes I had ever encountered. More importantly, I had positioned myself with the institutional authority and legal protection necessary to expose these crimes in a way that would ensure appropriate consequences for both Devon and Diana. But the plan that was crystallizing required one final element that would transform my response from conventional whistleblowing into something more personally satisfying. Devon's financial desperation and systematic client deception had created a unique opportunity for me to demonstrate just how completely he had misjudged my capabilities and resources. The weekend getaway I had planned as part of my performance would provide the perfect setting for the beginning of his education about exactly what kind of woman he had betrayed. The weekend getaway I had orchestrated was set for the Oregon coast, at a luxury resort in Cannon Beach that Devon and I had visited during our second year of marriage, when we still believed we were building something beautiful together. I had chosen the location deliberately, not for romantic nostalgia, but because the resort's business center would provide secure internet access for the final phase of my evidence compilation, while maintaining the pretense of a relaxing anniversary celebration. Friday afternoon, as I packed our bags while Devon finished what he claimed was an urgent conference call with West Coast investors, I received a text message that nearly shattered my carefully maintained composure. "Can't wait to have you all to myself when this whole situation resolves. The countdown to our real life together has begun." The message was ended for Diana, but Devon's careless contact management had sent it to me instead. The casual cruelty of referring to our 7-year marriage as a situation that needed to be resolved before he could begin his real life crystallized every doubt I had been suppressing about the moral implications of my planned response. For weeks I had been methodically gathering evidence and positioning myself for maximum strategic advantage, while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for effective planning. But seeing our marriage dismissed as an inconvenient obstacle to his authentic happiness brought the personal devastation crashing through my professional detachment like a dam bursting under pressure. I sat on our bed, surrounded by the clothes I was packing for what Devon believed would be a romantic weekend, and finally allowed myself to fully process the emotional reality of what I was planning to do. The evidence I had compiled would destroy both Devon's career and Diana's, potentially resulting in criminal charges and professional disgrace that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The financial consequences alone would be catastrophic: regulatory fines, civil lawsuits, and the complete collapse of any reputation they had built in Portland's financial community. Was I prepared to wield that level of destructive power? Did the satisfaction of revenge justify the systematic dismantling of two people's professional lives regardless of their crimes against me and their clients? The doubt that had been lurking beneath my strategic planning finally surfaced with full force. The woman I had been when I married Devon 7 years ago had believed in forgiveness, in working through relationship challenges, in assuming the best about people's motivations, even when their actions seemed hurtful. Had Devon's betrayal transformed me into someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of calculated destruction disguised as professional justice? My phone buzzed with another message, this one clearly intended for me. "Sorry for the delay. This West Coast deal is more complicated than expected, but it should close next week. Looking forward to our weekend together." The casual endearment from someone who was actively planning to abandon me once he felt confident I could survive without his guidance felt like salt poured into fresh wounds, but it also reminded me that my moral qualms about destroying Devon's career were founded on a fundamental misunderstanding of our situation. I wasn't contemplating revenge against someone who had made mistakes or poor decisions in our relationship. I was planning to expose systematic criminal behavior that was actively harming innocent people beyond myself. Devon's clients, many of them retirees and working families who had trusted him with their life savings, were being defrauded through manipulated statements and Ponzi scheme accounting. Diana's corporate espionage was undermining the competitive integrity of Portland's entire financial sector. The personal betrayal of their affair was devastating, but it was minor compared to the professional crimes they were committing against people who had no protection against their systematic deception. My access to evidence of these crimes created a moral obligation that transcended my personal feelings about their treatment of me. More importantly, I realized that my hesitation about destroying their careers was based on an outdated self-image that no longer reflected reality. The woman who had entered this marriage seeking external validation and believing she needed Devon's guidance to succeed professionally no longer existed. The evidence I had compiled demonstrated analytical capabilities and strategic thinking that exceeded anything Devon had ever accomplished in his legitimate business activity. I wasn't planning to destroy innocent people who had made mistakes. I was planning to expose criminal behavior by individuals who had systematically underestimated my ability to recognize and document their activity. Their downfall would be the logical consequence of their own actions combined with their fundamental miscalculation about my capabilities and resources. The final validation of my decision came when I reviewed the client files I had been able to access through my Morrison position. The scope of harm Devon was causing extended far beyond financial losses to genuine human suffering. Elderly clients were losing retirement savings they couldn't replace. Young families were seeing their children's college funds disappear into Devon's desperate attempts to maintain his lifestyle while his firm collapsed. The woman in the Meridian case whose husband's medical bills had forced them to liquidate their investment portfolio early. She had trusted Devon with money earmarked for experimental cancer treatment, and he had used it to cover earlier losses while providing her with statements showing fictional growth. The young couple who had invested their wedding savings with Whitmore Capital based on Devon's promises of conservative, secure returns. Their money had been gambled away in cryptocurrency speculation while their statements showed steady appreciation. These weren't abstract financial crimes occurring in some distant corporate environment. These were immediate, devastating impacts on real people whose trust Devon had exploited to maintain his facade of success while planning his escape with Diana. As I finished packing for our weekend trip, my resolve crystallized into something harder and more focused than doubt could undermine. Devon had positioned our relationship as a zero-sum competition where my success threatened his authority, and he had chosen to respond through systematic deception and betrayal. The time for seeking reconciliation or attempting to preserve what remained of our marriage had passed the moment he decided to steal from innocent people while planning to abandon me. The weekend in Cannon Beach would be his last opportunity to demonstrate any vestige of the man I had fallen in love with 7 years ago. But I was no longer holding my breath for redemption. That was never coming. Instead, I would finalize the preparations necessary to show Devon exactly what kind of woman he had betrayed, and what she was capable of accomplishing when her illusions were finally stripped away. The drive to Cannon Beach should have been romantic. 2 hours of scenic coastal highway with Devon behind the wheel of his BMW, discussing our plans for the weekend while autumn sunlight filtered through the Douglas firs that lined the route to Oregon's most picturesque resort destination. Instead, it became a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization as I maintained animated conversation about our upcoming anniversary, while mentally reviewing the final logistics of exposing his criminal enterprise. "This place brings back memories," Devon said as we pulled into the circular drive of the Stephanie Inn, the luxury resort perched on bluffs overlooking Haystack Rock. "Remember our second anniversary here? We talked about buying a beach house once Whitmore Capital really took off." The casual reference to his firm's supposed success while knowing its actual catastrophic condition would have been amusing if it weren't so indicative of his fundamental disconnection from reality. Devon had become so invested in maintaining the fiction of his professional achievement that he genuinely seemed to believe his own fabrications, even in private conversations with someone he assumed knew nothing about his actual financial situation. "That seems like a lifetime ago," I replied, which was more honest than he realized. The woman who had sat on this same terrace 2 years ago, listening to Devon's confident predictions about our financial future while accepting his subtle undermining of her professional capabilities, no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood exactly how power worked and wasn't afraid to wield it. We checked into the oceanfront suite that I had specifically requested, not for its romantic ambiance, but because it included a private office area with high-speed internet access that would allow me to coordinate the final phase of my plan without observation. Devon assumed the upgraded accommodations were part of my effort to create a memorable anniversary celebration. In reality, they were operational necessities for conducting the most important business transaction of my career. The weekend's choreography required delicate timing. Saturday would be devoted to maintaining the facade of marital harmony while positioning the final pieces of my strategy. Sunday morning would bring the revelation that would transform our relationship forever, but Devon needed to remain completely unaware of what was approaching until the moment of maximum impact. Saturday afternoon, while Devon napped on the suite's private balcony after an expensive lunch accompanied by too much wine, I used the office area to finalize the acquisition strategy that would serve as the centerpiece of my response to his betrayal. The financial analysis I had conducted over the previous weeks had revealed that Whitmore Capital was far more vulnerable than even Devon realized. His desperate attempts to maintain operational liquidity through client money manipulation and fraudulent performance reporting had created a cascade of obligations that the firm couldn't meet. Client withdrawal requests were accelerating as sophisticated investors began to recognize inconsistencies in their statements. The shell companies Devon had created to fabricate investment opportunities required ongoing financial support to maintain the illusion of legitimacy. Most critically, the regulatory scrutiny that would inevitably follow any investigation of his activities would freeze assets and create immediate insolvency. But what Devon didn't understand was that his firm's vulnerability created an opportunity for someone with sufficient capital and strategic positioning to acquire control through debt assumption and equity purchase. The Morrison position had provided me with access to institutional capital markets that Devon couldn't imagine, while my sterling portfolio performance had generated personal liquidity that far exceeded what he assumed I possessed. Working from the suite's business center, I coordinated with Morrison's acquisition team to structure a purchase offer that would give me majority control of Whitmore Capital at a fraction of its supposed market value. The deal required careful legal structuring to ensure that Devon's criminal liabilities wouldn't transfer to the new ownership, but Morrison's attorneys had extensive experience with distressed asset acquisitions that involved regulatory complications. The irony was exquisite. Devon's systematic deception had created the perfect conditions for his own professional destruction at the hands of the woman he had dismissed as professionally dependent. His fraud had made Whitmore Capital vulnerable to acquisition, while his affairs had given me moral justification for pursuing maximum advantage in any transaction. His fundamental misunderstanding of my capabilities had prevented him from recognizing that I possessed both the analytical skills to identify his vulnerability and the financial resources to exploit it. Saturday evening's dinner at the resort's acclaimed restaurant provided the perfect setting for what would be Devon's last meal as a successful entrepreneur, though he remained blissfully unaware of that reality. He ordered the most expensive items on the menu with the casual confidence of someone who believed his financial position was secure, regaling me with stories about Whitmore Capital's supposed expansion plans and his vision for capturing larger market share in the Pacific Northwest investment community. "I've been thinking we should upgrade the house again next year," he said over dessert, gesturing expansively with his wine glass. "Maybe add that home theater we talked about, expand the wine cellar. The business is performing well enough that we can afford to enjoy the rewards of success." The suggestion that we should spend money on home improvements using profits from his fraudulent enterprise, while he planned to abandon me for Diana Gilbert, required superhuman self-control to acknowledge with appropriate enthusiasm. But maintaining the performance was crucial for ensuring that Sunday morning's revelation would achieve maximum psychological impact. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, raising my glass in a toast to his vision. "Here's to success and getting exactly what we deserve." Devon clinked his glass against mine with genuine pleasure, completely missing the double meaning in my words. In less than 12 hours, he would discover that we were indeed about to get exactly what we deserved, but the distribution wouldn't be what he had anticipated. As we returned to our suite for what Devon assumed would be a romantic evening celebrating our anniversary, I finalized the last details of the acquisition offer that would give me control of his company. By Sunday morning, I would own the firm he had spent 5 years building, and his career as an independent entrepreneur would be over. But the real revelation would be watching Devon realize that the woman he had systematically underestimated possessed capabilities he had never imagined, and had been planning his professional destruction with the same analytical precision he claimed she lacked. The performance was almost over. Soon, it would be time to show Devon who Linda Whitmore really was. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline Pacific Northwest weather that made Oregon's coast legendary. Brilliant sunshine streaming through our suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, gentle waves rolling against the beach below, and a crisp autumn breeze that carried the scent of salt and cedar. Devon woke refreshed and affectionate, pulling me close with the satisfied contentment of someone who believed his deceptions remained perfectly concealed. "Happy anniversary weekend," he murmured against my neck, his hands tracing patterns on my skin with the practiced familiarity of 7 years of marriage. This has been exactly what we needed. Time away from work stress, just focusing on us. The irony of his words celebrating us while actively planning to leave me for Diana Gilbert might have been devastating a month ago. Now it simply provided confirmation that Devon had learned nothing about my actual capabilities or awareness during our time together. He remained convinced that his performance as the devoted husband was successfully concealing his betrayal, just as he believed his performance as a successful entrepreneur was concealing his financial crime. "It has been perfect," I agreed, sitting up and reaching for the coffee service I had ordered to arrive at precisely 8:30 a.m. "Though I do have a small surprise for you before we head back to Portland." Devon's expression brightened with the pleased anticipation of someone who enjoyed receiving gifts and attention. "You've already surprised me with this whole weekend. What else could you have planned?" I handed him his coffee, black, no sugar, exactly as he had drunk it every morning for 7 years, and retrieved my laptop from the suite's business area. "Well, you know how you've always said I should think more strategically about big picture opportunities, rather than focusing on day-to-day portfolio management." He nodded, settling back against the pillows with the indulgent expression he used when preparing to offer guidance on subjects he assumed I didn't fully understand. "Absolutely. You're brilliant at tactical analysis, but strategic thinking requires a different kind of vision." "What are you getting at?" I opened the laptop and pulled up the documents that Morrison's legal team had finalized during our Saturday evening dinner. "I've been working on something that I think demonstrates the kind of strategic thinking you've been encouraging me to develop." The screen displayed the acquisition documents for Whitmore Capital, legal paperwork that transferred majority ownership of Devon's firm to a holding company controlled by my Morrison investment fund. Every detail had been meticulously structured to ensure immediate legal effect, with financing arrangements that guaranteed the transaction's completion regardless of Devon's cooperation or approval. Devon's expression shifted from indulgent interest to confusion as he tried to process what he was seeing. "Linda, what is this? These look like corporate acquisition documents." "They are," I replied, my voice carrying the calm professional tone I used when presenting complex investment strategies to sophisticated clients. "Specifically, they're the paperwork transferring ownership of Whitmore Capital from you to me. The transaction became effective at midnight, so as of this morning I own your company." The silence that followed was profound. Devon stared at the laptop screen, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, as his mind struggled to understand what I had just told him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the careful confusion of someone trying to determine whether what they were hearing could possibly be real. "That's impossible. Whitmore Capital isn't for sale, and even if it were, you don't have the resources to acquire a firm that size. This has to be some kind of joke." I turned the laptop toward him so he could read the financial details more clearly. "Actually, Devon, Whitmore Capital has been effectively for sale for months. Your client withdrawal requests, operational debt, and regulatory liabilities created a situation where the firm needed immediate capital injection to remain solvent. I simply provided that capital in exchange for controlling ownership." His face had gone pale as he scrolled through the documents, recognizing the legal terminology and financial structures that confirmed this wasn't an elaborate prank. "Where did you get this kind of money? Your sterling salary couldn't possibly support an acquisition of this scale." "You're right that my sterling salary wouldn't be sufficient," I agreed, "but my new position as senior portfolio director at Morrison Venture Capital provides access to institutional capital markets that you apparently weren't aware I could leverage." The acquisition was funded through a combination of Morrison resources and my personal investment portfolio. The revelation that I had accepted a position at Morrison Diana's firm hit Devon like a physical blow. His hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup, the implications of my access to Morrison's resources and intelligence beginning to crystallize in his mind. "Morrison hired you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They recruited me specifically," I confirmed. "Apparently my work on the quantum dynamics deal impressed their investment committee. Diana Gilbert was particularly supportive of bringing me on board. She mentioned that she'd been following my career and believed I represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking Morrison needed. Devon's face had gone from pale to ashen as the scope of his miscalculation became clear. Not only had I positioned myself with the resources necessary to acquire his failing firm, but I had done so through an alliance with the very organization where his mistress worked, creating the perfect conditions for exposing their corporate espionage while simultaneously demonstrating my independent professional capabilities. But even if you could arrange the financing, he said desperately, I would never agree to sell Whitmore Capital. The firm represents everything I've built over the past 5 years. I smiled with the gentle patience of someone explaining market dynamics to a junior analyst. Devon, you're misunderstanding the nature of this transaction. This isn't a negotiated sale requiring your approval. This is a distressed asset acquisition necessitated by your firm's insolvency and regulatory exposure. I clicked to the next screen, revealing the comprehensive documentation of his financial crimes that had made the acquisition possible. You see, when a firm is engaged in systematic securities fraud, client money manipulation, and Ponzi scheme accounting, it creates legal vulnerabilities that can be exploited by sophisticated investors with appropriate regulatory relationship. Devon stared at the evidence of his deception displayed across the laptop screen: falsified client statements, documentation of non-existent investments, records of unauthorized trading with client funds. Every crime he had committed while believing his activities were undetectable was laid out in forensic detail that would be admissible in both civil and criminal proceedings. How did you? He began, then stopped as the full realization hit him. You've been investigating me. I've been conducting due diligence, I corrected. Just like any responsible investor evaluating an acquisition target. The difference is that I had access to information sources you never imagined I could leverage. The woman Devon had dismissed as professionally dependent had just acquired his company using capabilities he didn't know she possessed, while simultaneously exposing criminal behavior he thought he had successfully concealed. The balance of power in our relationship hadn't just shifted. It had been completely inverted in a single morning conversation, but I wasn't finished yet. The color drained from Devon's face as the full implications of what I had revealed began to register. He set down his coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly, staring at the laptop screen that displayed irrefutable evidence of his systematic fraud while simultaneously documenting my acquisition of the company he had spent 5 years building. Linda, I can explain all of this, he began, his voice carrying the desperate tone of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. Some of those client statements might look irregular, but the market has been volatile, and I've been protecting investors from unnecessary panic while underlying positions recover. The attempted rationalization was so weak that I almost felt sympathy for him. After months of condescending explanations about my supposed inability to understand complex financial structures, Devon was now offering accounting theories that wouldn't pass scrutiny from a first-year business student. Devon, I said gently, clicking to the next screen of evidence, I've documented 14 separate instances of you creating fictional investment opportunities to collect management fees on non-existent deals. The Henderson Group, Pacific Innovation Partners, Cascade Technology Ventures, none of these companies actually exist outside of shell corporations you established to fabricate deal flow. His mouth opened and closed silently as he recognized the company names he had been using to justify fees and performance bonuses while his actual investments lost money. The detailed forensic accounting I had conducted revealed not just the scope of his deception, but the sophisticated analytical capabilities required to uncover and document activities he had assumed were undetectable. More importantly, I continued advancing to documentation of his corporate espionage arrangement with Diana. I've compiled evidence of your collaboration with Morrison Venture Capital employees to steal proprietary information and manipulate competitive positioning in the Pacific Northwest investment market. The screen displayed email exchanges between Devon and Diana that clearly established their systematic theft of confidential information, including Morrison's client lists, investment strategies, and due diligence report. But what made Devon's face go completely white was the realization that these communications had been accessed and documented by someone who now worked inside Morrison's organization. You know about Diana, he whispered, the statement carrying the weight of someone whose last refuge of secrecy had been eliminated. I know about the affair, the corporate espionage and the systematic theft of intellectual property that you've been using to compete against firms whose confidential information you're accessing through your mistress," I replied matter-of-fact. "What you apparently don't know is that Diana has been advocating for Morrison to hire me, completely unaware that her new colleague has documented her betrayal of her own employer." Devon's strategic thinking had never been his strength, but even he could recognize the catastrophic position this revelation created. Not only had I acquired his company while he was planning to abandon me, but I had positioned myself to expose Diana's corporate crimes from within the very organization they had been betraying together. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice carrying the defeated tone of someone who understood that his options had been eliminated. "Money? A divorce settlement? Some kind of arrangement where this information doesn't get reported?" The question revealed how fundamentally he still misunderstood both my capabilities and my intentions. After systematically underestimating my intelligence for 7 years, he was now assuming that my strategic thinking extended only to conventional revenge or financial advantage, rather than recognizing the comprehensive nature of what I had orchestrated. "What I want," I said, closing the laptop and turning to face him directly, "is for you to understand exactly what you've lost through your own miscalculations." I retrieved my phone and opened the email application, showing him messages that had been arriving since midnight, as news of the Whitmore Capital acquisition began circulating through Portland's financial community. Industry contacts were congratulating me on the strategic brilliance of the acquisition. Morrison's leadership was praising the innovative approach to distressed asset investment. Even Sterling's management was expressing admiration for the career advancement the transaction represented. "The industry doesn't see this as a hostile takeover or aggressive business maneuver," I explained as Devon read the messages with growing horror. "They see it as a sophisticated investment strategy executed by someone with exceptional analytical capabilities and strategic vision. Your failure isn't being blamed on market conditions or bad luck. It's being attributed to fundamental incompetence that was exposed by superior business judgment." The professional humiliation was clearly more devastating to Devon than the personal betrayal of our marriage ending. His entire identity was built on the fiction that he was a successful entrepreneur whose business acumen deserved respect and admiration. Discovering that the industry viewed his failure as evidence of inadequacy, while celebrating my acquisition as demonstration of superior capabilities, was destroying the foundation of his self-concept. "But even more importantly," I continued, "you need to understand that this isn't the end of the consequences for your behavior. The evidence I've compiled of your securities fraud and systematic client deception has been provided to both the SEC and the Oregon Division of Financial Regulation. Diana's corporate espionage activities have been documented and will be reported to Morrison's leadership and appropriate law enforcement agencies." Devon's face had gone from white to gray as the full scope of his legal exposure became clear. "You're going to destroy both our careers over a marriage that wasn't working anyway." The question revealed his persistent inability to understand the moral dimensions of what he had done. In Devon's mind, the systematic fraud of his clients and the theft of proprietary information were merely personal relationship issues, rather than crimes that had harmed innocent people and violated fundamental principles of professional integrity. "I'm going to ensure that justice is served for crimes you committed while assuming that the woman you were betraying was too professionally inadequate to recognize or document your activities." I correct. "The fact that your business failure enables me to demonstrate capabilities you consistently underestimated is simply an additional benefit." My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Callie Gilbert. The timing was perfect for the final element of Devon's education about his miscalculation. "Excuse me," I said, answering the call on speaker. "Callie, good morning." "Linda, I hope I'm not interrupting your weekend, but I wanted to personally congratulate you on the Whitmore acquisition." Callie's voice filled the room with genuine enthusiasm. "The investment committee is amazed by the strategic vision and execution. Diana mentioned that she's particularly impressed by how you identified the opportunity and structured the transaction." Devon's expression as he heard his mistress praising my professional capabilities through the woman who was about to expose her crimes was a masterpiece of psychological devastation. The look of a man realizing that everyone he had underestimated possessed abilities he had never imagined, while everyone he had trusted was about to face consequences he hadn't anticipated. "Thank you, Callie," I replied, maintaining eye contact with Devon. "I'm looking forward to discussing how this acquisition demonstrates Morrison's commitment to innovative investment strategies when I return to the office tomorrow." As I ended the call, Devon sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that the woman he had dismissed as professionally dependent had orchestrated his complete professional destruction while positioning herself for unprecedented career advancement. The man who had told me I'd never survive without him was about to discover exactly what survival looked like when executed by someone whose capabilities he had never bothered to understand. 6 months later, I stood in the corner office on the 32nd floor of Morrison Venture Capital's downtown Portland headquarters, reviewing quarterly performance reports that exceeded even my most optimistic projection. The Whitmore Capital acquisition had been transformed from a failing firm engaged in systematic fraud into a specialized distressed asset division that had generated $47 million in returns during its first 6 months under new management. The view from my office encompassed the same city skyline I had gazed at from our Pearl District home during those final weeks of my marriage, but the perspective was entirely different now. Where I had once seen a landscape of professional limitation and personal dependence, I now saw a market full of opportunities that I was uniquely positioned to identify and capitalize upon. The transformation hadn't been without challenge. The regulatory investigations triggered by my evidence compilation had resulted in criminal charges against Devon for securities fraud, client money manipulation, and systematic misrepresentation of investment performance. He had ultimately plea bargained to a 5-year prison sentence and permanent prohibition from working in financial services, while agreeing to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for avoiding additional money laundering charges. Diana's fate had been equally dramatic. Her corporate espionage activities had resulted in immediate termination from Morrison, criminal charges for theft of proprietary information, and civil lawsuits from multiple firms whose confidential data she had stolen. The professional disgrace had effectively ended her career in venture capital, while the legal fees and settlement obligations had consumed most of her personal assets. But the most satisfying aspect of their downfall hadn't been the criminal consequences or financial penalties. It had been watching them realize that their systematic underestimation of my capabilities had created the perfect conditions for their own destruction. Devon's condescending assumptions about my professional dependence had prevented him from recognizing that I possessed both the analytical skills to uncover his crimes and the institutional resources to acquire his company. Diana's casual confidence in her deception had made her careless about operational security when dealing with someone she assumed was no threat to her schemes. The industry's response to the scandal had been swift and decisive. Portland's financial community had rallied around the narrative of sophisticated fraud being exposed by exceptional analytical work, with my role in uncovering the systematic deception becoming a case study in due diligence excellence that was taught at business schools throughout the Pacific Northwest. More importantly, the professional relationships I had built during my investigation had evolved into ongoing partnerships that were reshaping my career in ways I could never have imagined while seeking Devon's validation. The Morrison position had provided a platform for developing investment strategies that combined traditional venture capital approaches with the forensic accounting skills I had refined while documenting corporate fraud. My personal life had undergone an equally dramatic transformation. The divorce proceedings had been remarkably straightforward once Devon's criminal exposure became clear. His legal team had advised complete cooperation with Asset Division in exchange for my agreement not to pursue additional civil remedies for his theft of our shared resources. The Pearl District house had been sold, with proceeds funding my relocation to a penthouse apartment in the Pearl that provided both luxury and independence. But the most profound change had been internal. The woman who had entered that marriage 7 years ago, seeking external validation and accepting condescending guidance from someone whose actual capabilities were inferior to her own, had been replaced by someone who understood power dynamics with crystalline clarity. The professional confidence that had been gradually eroded by Devon's systematic undermining had been rebuilt on the foundation of demonstrated competence and measurable results. The afternoon brought a familiar ritual. my weekly lunch with Callie Gilbert to discuss Morrison's strategic direction and my role in shaping the firm's expansion into new markets. These conversations had evolved from supervisor-employee check-ins into genuine strategic partnerships where my insights about distressed asset opportunities were helping to position Morrison as the Pacific Northwest's most innovative venture capital firm. The Quantum Dynamics follow-up investment is performing even better than projected, Callie said as we reviewed portfolio reports over coffee at our usual downtown restaurant. Your analysis of AI integration in financial services has been remarkably prescient. The industry is finally catching up to strategies you identified months ago. The comment reflected a broader pattern in my professional relationship. Instead of seeking approval for strategies I was perfectly capable of developing independently, I was now recognized as someone whose analytical insights could guide institutional decision-making at the highest level. The validation I had once sought from Devon's condescending praise was being replaced by genuine respect from colleagues who valued competence over compliance. I've been thinking about expanding our focus to include renewable energy infrastructure, I said, outlining investment opportunities that combine traditional venture capital approaches with the environmental sustainability trends that were reshaping multiple industries. The regulatory environment is creating opportunities for early-stage investment in companies that understand both technological innovation and policy compliance. The strategic vision I was describing represented exactly the kind of forward-thinking analysis that Devon had consistently claimed I wasn't capable of developing without his guidance. The irony wasn't lost on me that my most innovative professional work had emerged only after his influence was completely eliminated from my decision-making process. As our lunch concluded, Callie mentioned a development that provided perfect closure to the transformation I had undergone. The Portland Business Journal wants to do a feature story about the Whitmore acquisition as an example of how sophisticated analysis can identify opportunities that others miss. They're particularly interested in your perspective on how analytical skills translate into strategic advantage in competitive markets. The prospect of industry recognition for the very capabilities that Devon had consistently dismissed as inadequate was deeply satisfying, but more important, it represented validation that my professional reputation now existed entirely independent of any connection to my former marriage or the man who had systematically undermined my confidence for 7 years. That evening, as I reviewed market analysis reports from my penthouse apartment, overlooking the Willamette River, I reflected on the journey from humiliated wife to industry leader that had begun with discovering Devon's affair and financial crime. The woman who had believed she needed his guidance to navigate complex professional challenges had been replaced by someone who was setting industry standards for innovative investment strategy. The man who had told me I'd never survive without him was serving the second year of his prison sentence, while I was building an investment portfolio that would likely exceed his entire career earnings within the next 2 years. His systematic underestimation of my capabilities had provided the perfect cover for acquiring the resources and positioning necessary to demonstrate exactly what survival looked like when executed by someone whose strength he had never bothered to understand. The transformation was complete. I hadn't just survived Devon's betrayal, I had used it as the foundation for building something far more valuable than what he had destroyed. A career and life built on my own merits, free from the limitations imposed by someone who had confused his insecurities with my inadequacy. The coffee stain that had marked the beginning of my humiliation all those months ago had been cleaned long ago, but its impact remained, not as a reminder of vulnerability, but as evidence that the moments of greatest challenge often precede the moments of greatest triumph. Some revenge, I had learned, wasn't about destruction, it was about transformation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.